Lydia and Thomas Monroe seemed like the perfect couple, quiet, devoted, and deeply rooted in their small-town life. But behind their picket fence and polite smiles was a secret so gruesome it shocked an entire community. Thomas had murdered his ex-girlfriend, and Lydia, the town's beloved vet nurse, had calmly turned their basement into a butcher's room and their backyard into a graveyard. In the quiet town of Fulridge, nestled between thick woods and winding rural roads, Lydia Monroe and her husband Thomas were the kind of couple people pointed to when they talked about second chances and fresh starts. Fulridge wasn't a place known for drama. Life moved slowly. Neighbors knew one another by name, and secrets had a way of staying buried. Lydia had moved there 2 years earlier from a city no one really asked about, and Thomas had grown up just a few towns over. When they got married in a small backyard ceremony, surrounded by string lights and mason jars, it looked like the beginning of a happy, settled life. Lydia was calm, kind, and always smiling. She worked as a veterinary nurse at a local clinic, where she was known for staying late and comforting nervous pet owners. Her gentle nature made her popular in the community, especially among older residents who trusted her immediately. She volunteered at the church, dropped off food for shut-ins, and never raised her voice. Thomas, a former firefighter, was equally well liked. Broad-shouldered and confident, he had a reputation for being dependable, someone you called when your pipes burst or your car broke down. After retiring early due to an injury, he did small repair jobs around town and never charged more than he had to. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months of meeting, they were living together. 3 months after that, they were married. To most people in Fulridge, it was romantic. Lydia had never talked much about her past relationships, and Thomas only ever mentioned his ex-girlfriend, once saying she had disappeared into her own mess. That was Elise Garner, a name that sparked little recognition outside a few of Thomas's old friends. Elise had vanished the year before he met Lydia, and police had closed the case, quietly, calling it a likely runaway situation. Elise was known to drift. She had no close family left and a history of erratic behavior. A few people thought maybe she got caught up with drugs or moved out of state. The news faded quickly, and no one pushed for answers. What no one knew was that the last person to see Elise alive had been Thomas. When Lydia moved into Thomas's house, she had questions, of course. She found some of Elise's old things in the garage: a shoe, a broken phone charger, a tangle of jewelry in a drawer. But Thomas explained it away easily. Elise had packed in a rush and left things behind. Lydia never pressed him. Or if she did, no one knew about it. From the outside, they were a united front, clean, organized, domestic. Their home was immaculate, the garden trimmed and neat, the curtains always pulled back to let in light. Friends described them as peaceful. No drama, one neighbor said, like a couple from a magazine. But beneath the polished surface was something darker, something neither of them spoke of, something they buried not in words but in actions. Because while most people thought Thomas had left his past behind, the truth was it had never really left him. And Lydia, who appeared so gentle, had her own way of dealing with things others couldn't handle. It was early October when the hunter made the discovery. The air was damp and cool, the forest floor littered with fallen leaves that muffled every step. He had been tracking a buck for hours through Blackridge Forest, an overgrown stretch of land known more for its isolation than its beauty. The hunter wasn't looking for anything unusual. He had passed that same area many times before, but this time something caught his eye. A dark shape, half buried under a pile of leaves and dirt, just off a narrow game trail. At first he thought it was trash. People dumped things in the woods all the time, but as he got closer, he noticed the shape was a duffel bag. It was heavy-duty, the kind used by athletes or frequent travelers. The zippers were rusted, and the outer fabric was stiff and dirty. A foul smell hung in the air, thick, clinging, unmistakably organic. The hunter backed away and called the sheriff's department, unable to shake the unease curling in his stomach. When officers arrived, they approached cautiously. The bag was zipped shut but stained. Bugs crawled along the seams, gloves on. They opened it, and the scene inside was horrific. Wrapped in layers of plastic and secured with duct tape were what clearly appeared to be human remains. Bones, long since stripped of flesh, were bundled like firewood. A few pieces were fractured, possibly sawed through, but what stood out most was a left hand, still partially intact, the skin leathery and sun-dried. On one finger was a ring, simple, silver, with the initials EG etched on the inside. The body was quickly transported to the state lab, where forensic examiners worked to determine the identity. Within days, DNA testing confirmed what investigators had quietly feared. The remains belonged to Elise Garner. The case, long believed to be a simple disappearance, was now a murder investigation. The news sent ripples through Fallridge. Most people barely remembered Elise. Some had assumed she moved away, others hadn't known she was missing at all. But the discovery of her body, disposed of so crudely, hidden in the woods for over a year, shocked even the quietest corners of town. Local media picked up the story, headlines reading things like, "Remains found in forest linked to missing woman," and "Cold case reopened after gruesome discovery." Investigators began retracing Elise's last known steps. The original case file noted she'd been reported missing by a co-worker after failing to show up for several shifts at her job. Her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry or struggle, but her phone and car had both vanished. Back then, detectives suspected she had simply left voluntarily. Now, with her body found in such a remote location, it was clear something far more sinister had happened. The attention quickly shifted to the last person known to be involved with Elise, her ex, Thomas Monroe. Detectives revisited their original interviews and noticed gaps, inconsistencies, and vague timelines. He had claimed they ended things months before she disappeared, but there was no real evidence to support that. And now, with Elise confirmed, dead and her body dumped in a forest just 30 miles from his home, Thomas Monroe was no longer just a footnote in her file. He was their primary suspect. The tip came in on a rainy Tuesday, anonymous and vague. A man's voice, altered or muffled, told police to search the basement of the Monroe home. He mentioned a second door hidden behind a shelving unit, something not listed in the original floor plan. The caller claimed there was a room no one talked about, a place where things had been kept cold for a reason. Investigators couldn't trace the call, but the details were too specific to ignore. Armed with a new warrant, detectives returned to the Monroe house. Lydia was calm as they entered. She offered them coffee, stood aside, and watched as they combed through the home. Everything on the surface looked ordinary: clean kitchen, staged living room, organized closets. But when they reached the basement, they found the shelf the caller had mentioned. Bolted to the wall, it took effort to shift. Behind it, barely visible in the shadows, was a narrow door with a rusted handle. The room behind it was small and cold, the air stale and metallic. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly as officers entered. In the corner sat an industrial-grade freezer, the kind used in butcher shops or morgues. It was locked. Nearby they found rolls of plastic sheeting, rubber gloves, heavy-duty trash bags, and what looked like surgical equipment, none of which had been there during the initial search months earlier. When the freezer was finally opened, its contents were far from frozen meat. While it had been cleaned, forensic teams found trace biological material smeared along the seams: blood, tissue, and strands of dark hair. One bag, tucked deep inside, contained bone fragments. Later analysis would reveal these fragments matched the same DNA profile as the remains discovered in the forest. Elise Garner had been there, or at least part of her, but the most disturbing discovery wasn't in the freezer. It was in a box shoved beneath a dusty cabinet. Inside was a spiral. Notebook worn and stained, it had no cover title. Just handwritten entries in small, neat letters. The writing matched Lydia's. What began as clinical notes soon spiraled into something else. Pages discussed decomposition rates, chemical solutions, and efficient methods for separating joints. It read like a combination of science textbook and personal journal. The chilling part wasn't just the detail, it was the tone. Calm, detached. As if she had been studying, preparing. One page was a detailed checklist: gloves, tarps, saw, bleach, shovel. Next to each item was a date and time. Another page was titled noise control, with notes about music volume and insulation techniques. The final entry was dated just 2 days after Elise's reported disappearance. It read, "Removal complete, prep successful, will monitor for leakage." When questioned, Lydia dismissed the notebook as fiction, just something she'd been writing for a true crime blog she never launched. She said the tools were for animal care, the freezer for clinical storage, but no one believed her. Not anymore. The coldness of the room mirrored something deeper in her demeanor, something calculating and void of panic. Whatever had happened to Elise, Lydia hadn't just known about it, she had been part of it. Thomas Monroe's calm demeanor began to crack the moment the results from the plumbing tests came in. Forensic investigators had spent 2 full days analyzing the basement drain, tracing every pipe and joint for biological evidence. What they found told a story more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Inside the main drainage line, stuck in the curved trap beneath the cement floor, were remnants of human blood and tissue, microscopic fragments, but enough to match DNA. The blood belonged to Elise Garner. This discovery was the final blow in a growing wall of evidence. The duffel bag in the woods, the hidden freezer, Lydia's notebook, all damning but circumstantial, without proof of the killing itself. The blood in the drain was different. It placed Elise's remains inside the Monroe home and proved an effort had been made to dispose of her bodily fluids through the plumbing system. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding. A cleanup. Investigators brought Thomas in again, this time with the evidence laid bare. He remained stoic at first, denying involvement, claiming he had no idea how Elise's blood could have ended up in the basement. He said it must be a mistake, a setup, something he couldn't explain, but the pressure mounted. When detectives told him they had found Lydia's fingerprints on the freezer and her handwriting in the notebook, his expression changed. It wasn't fear, it was resignation. Eventually he confessed, not in a dramatic outburst, but slowly, almost mechanically. He said Elise had come over one evening. She was upset, demanding to talk, trying to reopen a relationship Thomas had long since walked away from. According to him, the argument escalated. She shoved him. He shoved back. She slipped, hit her, head on the concrete floor, and didn't move again. He insisted it wasn't murder, just a terrible accident, but what he described next made it clear the line between accident and intent had blurred almost immediately. He said Lydia came home. Later that night, she found him sitting in the basement beside Elise's body. He expected panic, tears, maybe screaming, but Lydia had been silent. She examined Elise's body like a problem to be solved. Then she told Thomas to go upstairs and wait. She took control, brought down cleaning supplies, bleach, gloves. She wrapped the body, covered the floor, and started scrubbing. Thomas claimed, "He didn't ask questions. He just followed instructions." Lydia told him they couldn't call the police, that no one would believe it was an accident. She convinced him they had too much to lose. Over the following days, the body disappeared. Lydia handled everything, working late into the night, using equipment she already had in her possession. He said he never asked where she took the pieces, or how she got rid of them. He didn't want to know. To investigators, Thomas's story was both revealing and terrifying. He wasn't the cold mastermind they had once suspected. He was complicit but not in control. Lydia, the gentle nurse, had shown a level of calm precision that bordered on inhuman. The case was no longer just about murder. It was about what? Someone is truly capable of when love, loyalty, and fear collide in the darkest of ways. The final search began with a whisper from a neighbor. An older woman, living 2 doors down from the Monroes, had been following the case closely in the local paper. Something gnawed at her memory. A few weeks after Elise Garner disappeared, she remembered Lydia suddenly becoming obsessed with gardening. It was winter, too late to plant anything, yet Lydia had spent hours in the backyard digging a new bed by hand. She was seen hauling bags of fertilizer and soil, even when the ground was still partly frozen. The neighbor thought it was strange but harmless at the time. Now, with everything that had come to light, she wasn't so sure. Detectives took the tip seriously. The Monroe's backyard was a modest stretch of grass bordered by hedges and a rusted chain-link fence. In one corner, a perfectly rectangular vegetable bed stood out against the overgrown lawn. A small sign staked into the soil read, "Lydia's Garden." The dirt was dark and rich, far healthier than the rest of the yard, and rows of late-season vegetables had already begun to sprout. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what shovels. Soon confirmed, multiple anomalies beneath the surface. As investigators dug, they began to uncover layers of soil that had clearly been disturbed and compacted. Beneath that were trash bags, some decayed, others still intact. Inside them were animal bones, likely to deter suspicion if anyone had ever found them. But deeper down, mixed among the debris, were unmistakable fragments of human remains. It started with teeth, small, discolored, several with fillings. Then came a partial jawbone, shattered in two, a vertebra, splintered. Finally, a piece of skull bearing a distinct surgical plate Elise Garner was known to have had from a car accident years earlier. Forensic analysis left no doubt. These remains had once belonged to Elise. The garden had been more than a burial site. It was a grotesque form of disposal. Experts later concluded that Lydia had used crushed remains, bone meal essentially, to fertilize the soil. She had blended human and animal fragments and worked them into the dirt with chemical accelerants to speed decomposition. It was methodical, intentional, and deeply disturbing. The discovery sealed Lydia's fate. At trial, prosecutors described her not as an accessory, but as the architect of the cover-up. They painted a portrait of a woman who had calmly, ruthlessly, taken charge of a murder scene and turned it into a controlled operation. Thomas, they argued, may have delivered the fatal blow, but Lydia had erased Elise from the world in a way that only someone with knowledge and precision could have managed. Lydia showed no emotion in court. No tears, no outrage, no remorse. The jury convicted her in under 4 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas received 25 years for his role, though some believed he got off too easy. The Me. Case left Fallridge scarred. The garden was dug up, the home eventually demolished. Yet long after, people still talked about the woman who grew vegetables in soil tainted by a body, who smiled in church while hiding a secret just beneath the surface.